Alrighty, guys. It's Unholy Knight here. I am here to go over the types of enemies you will come across in the future. I am on the Taskforce 412 server, and let's get started with the Middle Eastern Militia. These guys, they look like civilians. They have the intelligence of civilians, but their weapons do pack a wallop. They normally do not wear body armor, so 5.56 is probably your best option to use against these guys. They do carry web gear, they do carry grenades, they carry anything between World War II up to Russian Cold War. Every once in a while you might see an old US asset in their ranks, but not very common. They do use Russian anti-tank weapons, such as the RPG-7. The RPG-7 is lethal. It can knock out the MRAPs. There are HE versions of this rocket, but the most common is its standard heat round. It can knock out MRAPs, Humvees, just really make a mess of things. But they are inaccurate. Stay anywhere between 300 to 400 is their effective range, or 0 to 400 is their effective range. Past that, you should be pretty safe from these guys, although sometimes they can get pretty lucky. They also use the Russian PKM and the SVD for their marksmen. The SVD is pretty lethal. The PKM is basically like an M240 Bravo. Can lay down some pretty heavy suppression fire. It is 7.62, so it does pack a wallop, as well as the SVD is also 7.62. Most of these guys' weapons are in the 7.62, so your plates and all your little jiggly bits are quite vulnerable to these guys. And next, now these guys kind of look the same, but these are Islamic State. These guys do wear body armor. They wear a mix of US and Russian body armor. Usually they use a Russian body armor for their vest, which is tier 5 and tier 6 plates. So try to shoot them in the head. Shooting them in the chest, unless you're packing 7.62 or better, is not a viable option. They can take a wallop. You can bring them down. 5.56 armor piercing does have a chance of penetrating, but it's just best to use 7.62 when it comes to these guys. They have the same intelligence level. Nah. They're a little bit better trained. They have more access to better equipment, as you can see with their armor. Their RPGs are the same, but they do use like MG42s, so World War II tech all the way up to Cold War, as well as a mix of US assets as well. On to the next. We are moving into the static weapon systems. I will describe them, tell you what they are, and how to deal with them. This is a Dishka. This is a high mount Dishka. This is a 360-degree turret. It is a 50 cal, so treat it like a M2 Browning heavy machine gun. It can knock out helicopters. It can knock out Humvees. It can disable an MRAP, but it cannot destroy it. And it can shoot through some walls and cover. So make sure you just keep it a safe distance from these guys. As you can see, the operator is pretty exposed, so send a few rounds this direction and you'll probably get them. On to the next. You have the two versions of the Cord heavy machine gun. These are also 50 caliber machine guns. They're a bit more advanced and a bit more accurate than the Dishka, but the principle is still the same. This is the anti-air version. It is a 360 degree, whereas this one is a fixed turret. Basically go to the sides and just flank this guy. This guy, you're just going to have to either sneak up on him or engage from very far distance where he cannot see you. Neither the Islamic State nor the Middle Eastern militia use any advanced hardware. They do have access to ADGMs, but they're primitive. Next is something you should all be familiar with, is the M2 Browning heavy machine gun. You have the AA version to the right and the fixed version to the left. These guys, I mean, it's an M2. I mean, it can knock out helicopters, Humvees, MRAPs, basically treated just like the Discus. On to the next. You have the SCPG-9. This thing is very lethal against both armor and infantry as well, because it does have a shape charge. It does have a very long effective range. The problem is the fact that it is very low to the ground. So it's very difficult for them to position these things. So normally they'll put them on top of buildings or along the side of the road. Um, they're very hard to hide, but they're easy to deal with. As you can see, the operator is extremely exposed. On to the next. This is a ZIS-23 anti-aircraft battery. It is a twin-link 23mm autocannon. These things are very, very lethal to both ground and air. It can destroy Humvees, MRAPs, as well as any aircraft. It's primarily used against helicopters and possibly like Humvees, light skins, and stuff like that. It can disable Bradleys, and strikers, but it could destroy a striker, but it cannot destroy a Bradley. And they do not have the armor-piercing versions of the ground PMPs. On to the next. This is a GSG-30. It's a 30mm auto grenade launcher. It is Russian in origin. They're not very common, but they are very lethal. And in the back you have the American Mark 19 40mm automatic grenade launcher. They have basically the same level of lethality. And obviously the Mark 19, being a bigger round, is more lethal, but these are both extremely rare among these guys' rank. On to the next. This is basically someone got bored and took a lawn chair and strapped 2 fucking Iglas on the side. The Igla is a IR seeking missile. These are shoulder fired. Most of the time they are carried by men. But this is just someone got lazy and wanted to sit down to shoot planes. Not very effective against fixed wing aircraft, but they are very effective against helicopters. So do keep an eye out for these. On to the next. This is a Mantis ATGM. It is a primitive system. It's a wire guided. It can knock out anything up to a Bradley that does not have the ERA protection. Anything under that is just toast. Extremely long range and difficult to find sometimes. The operator is, as you can see, is extremely vulnerable. These guys also have access to mortar artillery. I mean, it's a mortar. Medium range, very lethal. Just run it. If you hear that lovely whistle, just run into a building or just lay down. Next, we have vehicles. I'm going to go over the light skins first, and then I'm going to be moving into the more heavily armored later. This is your Nissan with a PKM fixed to the front. It is not a 360, so just flank these guys. This is very common for them to use this type of truck with this type of system on board, but they do have some that are more lethal. On to the next. This is the version of the Gaz. The Gaz is basically a Russian Jeep. These guys love these things. You're more likely to see these two versions than the other two. The one on the left is armed with a Dishka, and the one on the right is armed with an SCP-G9. They don't have like any advanced systems, so they need to be stationary to be effective and to be accurate. So if you can knock out the driver or the gunner before the vehicle stops moving, that would be your best bet. On to the next, we have the versions of the Land Rover. The Land Rover is pretty much just a bigger Jeep. It can carry this canvas one over here. It can carry men, but it's uncommon for them to actually use it in that role. Once again, you're more likely to run into these armed versions. This one is equipped with a M2, and the other one is equipped with a SPG-9. Light skins. All these vehicles are light skins. 7.62 can knock them out quickly. 5.56 can penetrate the glass. They have no ballistic protection whatsoever. As well as these, you should all be pretty familiar with these. This is the off-road truck. One is equipped with an M2. The other one's equipped with an SVG-9. Same as the others. Light skins, 5.56, 7.62 can mess them up pretty well. They had no ballistic protection. On to the Humvees. These are solely used by the Islamic State. Pretty much if it's a black Humvee, it's an enemy Humvee. The glass is ballistic protection, so 5.56 is pretty useless against these guys. These come in two versions with the M2 Browning and the Mark 19. These are extremely rare for you to come up against these, but they are quite lethal. Recommendation would be either to use light AT against these things for effective killing. 7.62 armor piercing can penetrate the glass and kill the driver and the gunner on the inside. As you can see, the driver's pretty exposed, so he's pretty easy to knock out. Both the Middle Eastern militia and the Islamic State will sometimes use these. These are called Urals. They are just cargo trucks. Sorry about that. They can carry ammo, troops, all sorts of goodies. And they do come in a version that is armed with a ZS-23 battery, which can be quite fatal. On to the next. You have the BTR-60 and the M113. The BTR-60 is on my left. Think of Magic School Bus. They're long, they're light-skinned. Anything 50 caliber and higher can knock these things out. Recommendation is to hit it here in the center where the ammunition and fuel is storage. If you hit it here, this is the engine bay, you may blow it up, but more than likely you will just disable them because, Russia for some reason. Next you have the M113. M113 is a American-made light APC. They're very easy to knock out, but they can pack a wallop. With the M2 up top, the driver can recede, and so can the gunner. On to the next, you have the BMP series. Now, for some reason, people love to mistake BMPs and BTRs. The biggest difference is if you see tires, it's a BTR. If you see tracks, it's a BMP. This is classed as a IFV, which is an infantry fighting vehicle. They can carry soldiers, but they are lightly armored. These guys, so the one on my left is a BMP-1. Now, this is a 73mm cannon with an ATGM. They do have a PKM as a coaxial. My recommendation where to hit these guys is dead center on the side. Your AT4s can knock these guys out, but do not engage from the front because the engine block will absorb all of the AT round and you just wasted AT. The turret will still be functional. You might kill the driver. There's a chance they'll get out, but if the engine's not destroyed all the way, they'll remain in there and just ruin your day. Now, this thing right here, this is a BMP-2. Has the same armor rating as the BMP-1. The difference is it has a Mantis ATGM system, which is a bit more advanced than what the BMP-1 has. But the biggest difference of this one and what it primarily uses is this 30mm autocannon. It does have a PKM for coaxial, but the 30mm autocannon is highly lethal against anything under a Bradley. So everything we have access to, including our helicopters, this thing will just make mincemeat out of. These are a high threat. Try to get your air to engage these guys from a distance. Do not get close to these. Now, something I forgot to mention. This 73mm cannon uses heat charges and high explosives. Um, it is lethal, but it's slow. So just move fast and don't get hit. Next is the Humble T-55 medium tank. This is a Cold War era Russian tank. These are extremely rare for the Islamic State to have, as well as the militia can have them as well. They don't really know how to use them. It does have a 125mm cannon with that fires armor piercing as well as high explosives, and it has a PKM coaxial machine gun. And they do not have a hull mounted. Um, AT4s, Karla Gustavs, Maz, all can knock this thing out from the front, but it's recommended to hit it in the side dead center as well, because that's where the ammo is usually between the track and the upper hull of the plate is the best. Next is the T-34-85. This is even oddly more rare than the T-55. It does have an 85mm cannon that fires armor piercing, as well as a DP-28 coaxial and hull mounted as well. These guys are pretty lethal. They can make a mess of things, but they're easy to knock out with light AT. On to the next. This is a Russian T-72 MBT. These things are nasty. Fortunately, the Islamic State nor the Middle Eastern militia do not have access to any of the advanced versions with the ERA on it. But AT4s will not knock this thing out from the front. You have to hit it from the side. Your heavier versions of the Maz heat rounds can knock these things out, but the lighter versions cannot. As I said, hit it from the sides. Do not hit it from the rear because you'll just disable it and piss them off. This is a BM-21. It is a mobile rocket artillery. They're very lethal, but these guys, when y'all see them, are more likely going to be in a fixed position because they have extreme range. And I believe it's a 120mm rocket, so they can pack a wallop. And that concludes the Islamic State and Middle Eastern militia. On to the Russians. Yay. Okay, so these are your standard Russian troops. This is your standard rifleman, AK-47 or AK-74. They do have Tier 5 armor. If you look at them carefully, they look oddly familiar to the Islamic State. It's because they use the same equipment. They use older equipment. They do have light AT. It's not very effective. It can knock out Humvees, but that's about it. And it can disable MRAPs. These are your drivers. These operate the tanks and stuff like that. The key difference is this is a commander. So if he's got an AK-74U, he's probably the commander, and he usually has a little booklet with him. These guys use the PKM and the, oh god, good lord, there's so many. PKM and PKP. They both serve the same purpose. They're general machine guns, or light machine guns, however you want to call them. They're 7.62. They pack a mean wallop. These are actually the more executive kind of looking guys. The one to the left is actually a driver of the guy to the right. The guy on the right is usually a commander, so blue berets. These guys are important. Try to kill or capture them, depending on your mission. And they do use SVTs for snipers. Their snipers are lethal, so be on the lookout for them. As I said, they have light AT, but they also have heavy AT and AA. They have the primitive version of the RPG-7, but they also have the RPG-7V2, which fires more advanced rockets, including thermobaric, so they can be nasty. As well as IGLA manpad systems. IGLAs, again, as I went over with the chair system over there, it is pretty lethal to helicopters and somewhat effective against aircraft, fixed-wing aircraft. The Russians do have an artillery. I believe this is a 125 millimeter artillery piece. It's only in a static position. You'll usually find these at bases and stuff like that in fortified positions. And the Russians also have the same mortar as the Islamic State. The Russians, they love to use, this is a Gaz, this is a Ural, and this is, cannot remember off memory, a Kama AZ. These are all cargo trucks. They all serve the same purpose. There are armed versions. Usually you'll find a ZS-23 anti-aircraft battery in these, if they are the armed versions, and they're just light AA. They're pretty easy to knock out. There's no armor in these things. So 5.56 will just shred them. These are your humble Gazes, same as before with the Islamic State. No armor, light infantry, transport, and VIP transport. This is the newer version of the Gazes. These guys treat them like Humvees. The glass is armored. They do have a unique feature with them, is the fact that they the armed versions of these have PKMs and GSU 30s. So these guys can be pretty lethal. They do carry RPGs inside them, as well as light AT. And next you have the BRDMs. The BRDMs, they're light armored vehicles. They're not amphibious. They're pretty easy to knock out. Light AT. This ballistic class is pretty weak, and these two front hatches right here, they'll usually drive when they're open, so you can pop the driver. They are armed with a 14.5 cal cannon, I guess you can say. They're pretty lethal against Humvees. They can disable BTRs. And this is the BRDM ATGM version. The only weapon system on board is the ATGM system. These are rare. They're usually used for ambushes or scout rolls. The ATGMs on here are pretty dangerous. MRAPs, Humvees, Bradleys, even sometimes tanks can fall prey to these things. On to the next, you have the Russian BTR. This is the BTR 60 version, both of these versions. The difference is this is the one on the left is a BTR 80 that just has a 14.5, the same system as the BRDM. They do like to open the hatches so the crew is vulnerable from the inside if you can throw enough lead down these, but honestly just use a light AT against these things to knock them out quick and in a hurry. This is the major difference, as you can see, is the BTR-80A. This has the same gun as the BMP-2 I talked about earlier, and a PKM coaxial. These are both troop transports. They're pretty lethal, and they can lay down a good volley of fire. On to the next, we have the BMP-1 and the BMP-2. I went over these earlier. 73mm cannon on the left, 30mm autocannon on the right. Both very dangerous, but the BMP-1 is very slow, but the BMP-2's turret is significantly faster. The Russians have two types of mobile artillery. These are the 2S1 and the 2S3M1. You're going to find these in fire bases and stuff like that. You're not going to see these running around. They're usually pretty fortified. They're lightly armored. Artillery can knock them out as well as your CAS. They are very dangerous. I believe their cannon is a 130 millimeter cannon, and they have very long range. Next, we're going to move on to tanks. This is the 2S25. This is like an amphibious assault tank. I believe it's a 125 millimeter cannon, and it can fire ATGMs as well. Very dangerous, but they're lightly armored and can be easily knocked out. On to the next, you have the T-72s and T-80s. The Russians, they don't really use the T-55s anymore, as I talked about earlier, but this is your more common T-72 version you're going to run into. These little bricks here are ERA. They will stop anything we have. As you can see, it's pretty well armored all the way around with ERA. These things are highly lethal. They're very difficult to knock out. Even to the side, it'll take you at least 2 rounds, even from a Maz, to knock these guys out due to their ERA. I guess you can kind of hit them from the side at this angle to get past the ERA, but it's difficult. Next, you have, it has a 125 millimeter cannon that can also fire ATGMs and the cord for anti-aircraft batteries. Next, you have the T-80. The T-80 is basically just a more armored version of the T-72. It's got a 130 millimeter cannon that can fire ATGMs, as well as a cord for anti-aircraft. It's got these weird little plates here, which is spaced armor, so it can kind of survive heavy AT. Light AT is almost completely useless against these things. Just hit it with a Maz or call in CAS. They do have the versions that come with ERA as well, which is pretty scary. And this is like this is a T90. These little eyes confuse ATGMs in real life. And they have a cord as well as a PKM coaxial. These things are very difficult to knock out. Once you can hit it from the side, or honestly, sometimes your best bet is just hit it in the rear to disable it and run away, go around it. On to the next aircraft, rotary wing. This is a Mi-24P version. You know it's a P version due to the fact that it's got a twin link cannon. I think it's a 30 millimeter on the front. It's very dangerous. It can carry soldiers on the inside. These things are more used by the special forces than your general ground troops. Very dangerous. They're like a flying tank. They're difficult to knock out. On to the next, you have the Mi-24P version. The major difference between the V and the P is the P has this turret that is very dangerous. It's a 23 millimeter minigun. Can make a mess of infantry squads and light armored vehicles. The Mi-24 can have ATGMs, anti-air rockets. It's very, very dangerous. But the biggest difference is it's difficult to maneuver at speeds. But I would recommend using Stingers against these things. On to the next, just a humble Mi-8 troop transport / gunship. These things are just like really oversized Hueys. They can carry rockets. They can even carry machine guns in the front, which is terrifying, and the back. And they can carry almost 2 squads of infantry. On to the next. This is the Orca. This is almost exclusively used by Spetsnaz. I mean, it's a troop transport. Treat it like a Huey. They're easy to knock out. Any form of AT or even just heavy ground fire can disable these and knock them out. I wanted to go over quickly about the Spetsnaz real quick. These guys are pretty dangerous. They're very lethal. They have modern AK-74s and RPKs. The RPK is a 7.62 with a 75 drum mag. It's just a light machine gun. Next, you have your humble grenadier with his 30mm grenade launcher. Most of the time, these guys rock suppressors and night vision. So basically, if they have this weird little night vision thing and a suppressor on their gun, they're more than likely Spetsnaz. They don't actually wear a vest per se for body armor. Their suits provide body armor for them, but 5.56 armor piercing and higher can hurt these guys pretty well. They all have optics, and they're all very good shots. This guy right here, he is the Spetsnaz marksman. He is armed with a 12.7 sniper rifle, and he can make a mess of things really quick. This is a KA-50, 52. Am I wrong? Let's see. I might be wrong. Yeah, KA-52. This is like just an attack helicopter. That's all it does. Very dangerous. ATGMs, rocket batteries, AA. They're very fast and they're very difficult to knock out. And then you have the KA-28, which is the older version of the KA-50. Sometimes the KA-50 will have a cannon, and sometimes not. Whereas the KI-28 usually always has a 30mm turreted cannon. These things are very dangerous and very difficult to knock out. But I think that's it. That concludes the PID version of this video. If you have any more questions, you can let me know, and I will get back to you. Thank you. See y'all later.